The fire crackles softly before us tonight, sending sparks dancing upward into the clear night sky above this quiet pine forest. The stars shine brilliantly overhead, unmarred by any earthly light, each one a distant sun, a witness to countless stories across the ages. Tonight, we gather around these ancient flames to journey back through time itself, to witness one of history's most dramatic and heartbreaking days. 2,000 years ago, on a morning much like any other, the sun rose over the Bay of Naples in the Roman Empire. The year was 79 AD, and in the thriving city of Pompeii, 30,000 souls began what they believed would be another ordinary day. The mountain that loomed over their city, Vesuvius, stood silent and majestic, its slopes covered in the vineyards and orchards that made this region so prosperous. In a bakery on the Via dell'Abbondanza, Marcus Attilius stretched and yawned as he prepared for another day of feeding his neighborhood. The sweet scent of yesterday's bread still lingered in his shop, mixed with the earthy smell of fresh flour. He had inherited this bakery from his father, just as his father had from his grandfather. The rhythms of bread making were as constant as the tides, as reliable as the sunrise painting the walls of his shop in warm golden light. Across the city, in a villa adorned with intricate frescoes and marble statues, Lucius Caesius reviewed his inventory. Amphorae filled with the finest wines from his vineyards on Vesuvius's fertile slopes lined his courtyard. The volcanic soil, enriched by ancient eruptions that no living person remembered, produced wines that were coveted throughout the empire. Today, he planned to finalize a deal that would ship these wines to Rome itself, to grace the tables of senators and wealthy patricians. In a modest home near the theater district, Julia prepared her children for the day ahead. Her daughter, Claudia, fidgeted impatiently as Julia braided her dark hair, while her younger son, Marcus, played with wooden figurines of gladiators on the floor. The children chattered excitedly about the games planned for next week at the amphitheater. Life in Pompeii was rich with entertainment and culture, a place where Roman civilization flourished under the benevolent shadow of the great mountain. In the gladiator barracks, Gaius Appuleius Diocles sat quietly sharpening his gladius. The bronze blade caught the morning light as he worked, his calloused hands moving with practiced precision. Tomorrow would bring another performance in the arena, another chance to earn his freedom through skill and courage. He thought of his family in distant Gaul, wondering if he would ever see them again. The mountain outside his window stood as it always had, eternal and unchanging, a comfort in the uncertain life of a gladiator. As the sun climbed higher, Pompeii's forum began to fill with the sounds and sights of daily commerce. Merchants called out their wares. Children ran between the columns, chasing stray dogs. And politicians gathered in small groups discussing the affairs of the empire. The forum was the beating heart of the city, where news from Rome arrived with traveling merchants, where marriages were arranged, and where the pulse of Roman life could be felt most strongly. Around the third hour of the morning, a subtle tremor passed through the city. Oil lamps swayed gently. Wine in cups created tiny ripples, and conversations paused momentarily. Most residents barely noticed. Earthquakes were common in this region, part of life in Campania. Marcus the baker steadied a wobbling amphora and continued his work. Lucius glanced up from his scrolls, noted the brief shaking, and returned to his calculations. Such tremors had occurred for days, even weeks, but life in Pompeii had taught its people to carry on. From every corner of Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius could be seen rising majestically above the landscape. Its slopes, green with grapevines and dotted with white villas, seemed the very picture of pastoral tranquility. No one alive could remember it ever being anything but a gentle, life-giving presence. The fertile soil that fed their crops, the springs that watered their gardens, all seemed like gifts from benevolent gods. Yet beneath that peaceful exterior, forces beyond human imagination were stirring. In courtyards throughout the city, children played their morning games, their laughter echoing off marble walls adorned with colorful frescoes. They enacted scenes from Homer's epic tales, pretended to be great generals conquering distant lands, or simply chased each other through the shadows and sunlight that painted their world in shades of gold and amber. Their voices carried on the warm morning air, a sound as timeless as childhood itself, as innocent as the dawn that would soon give way to unimaginable darkness. In the temples scattered throughout Pompeii, priests conducted their morning rituals as they had for generations. Incense rose in thin columns toward painted ceilings. Offerings of grain and wine were placed before marble statues of the gods, and prayers were whispered for the continued prosperity of the city. At the Temple of Jupiter, the priest noticed that the sacred flame seemed to flicker more than usual, but attributed it to the morning breeze that sometimes stirred the air within the sanctuary. High on the slopes of Vesuvius, in the Villa Rustica that dotted the mountainside, farmers began their daily work among the vines. The air was sweet with the scent of ripening grapes, and the view down to Pompeii and the bay beyond was breathtaking. These wealthy landowners lived what many considered the ideal Roman life, close to nature, blessed with abundant harvests, far from the political turmoil of Rome itself. The mountain that provided their prosperity seemed as permanent as the stars themselves. Sextus Pompeius Axiochus, one of the city's water engineers, made his morning inspection of the aqueduct systems that brought fresh water from mountain springs. The engineering marvels that supplied Pompeii with clean water were a source of civic pride. Fountains bubbled cheerfully at street corners, public baths filled with heated water, and private homes enjoyed the luxury of running water, all made possible by the ingenuity of Roman engineering and the generous springs that flowed from the mountain slopes. In workshops throughout the city, artists and craftsmen began their daily work. Painters mixed their pigments, preparing the vibrant reds and golds that would adorn villa walls. Mosaic artists carefully placed tiny tesserae to create intricate patterns that would last for centuries. Sculptors chiseled marble into forms of gods and heroes. The morning light was perfect for such detailed work, and the artists of Pompeii were renowned throughout the empire for their skill and creativity. As the morning progressed, the city's markets came alive with activity. Merchants arranged their wares, fresh bread from the bakeries, olive oil from local groves, garum fish sauce that was a Roman delicacy, and exotic goods brought by ship from distant provinces. The sound of coins changing hands, the calls of vendors, and the good-natured bargaining of customers created the vibrant symphony of Roman commerce. It was a sound that had echoed through these streets for generations. In the gardens of wealthy villas, morning dew still glistened on carefully tended flowers and herbs. Fountain water caught the sunlight, creating tiny rainbows in the spray. Bees hummed among the blossoms, and small birds chirped from branches heavy with fruit. These private paradises represented the Roman ideal of harmonious living, where nature and civilization blended in perfect balance. The gardens were places of contemplation and beauty, where the stresses of daily life could be forgotten. Down at Pompeii's harbor, sailors and dock workers began loading ships with the city's exports, amphorae of wine, bundles of fine textiles, and crafted goods were carefully stowed for journeys to ports throughout the Mediterranean. The harbor was Pompeii's window to the wider world, where news, goods, and cultures from across the empire converged. The morning breeze carried the scent of salt air and the sounds of different languages, as merchants from many lands conducted their business. In the workshop of Lucius Titus, the city's master blacksmith, the forge was already glowing red-hot in the morning air. Sparks flew as hammer met hot iron, shaping tools for farmers, weapons for gladiators, and household implements for daily life. The heat from the forge was intense even in the early hours, but it was nothing compared to the fires that lay sleeping deep beneath the mountain. The rhythmic ringing of hammer on anvil provided a steady beat to the morning's activities. In homes and schools throughout the city, children began their morning lessons. Wax tablets were prepared for writing practice, scrolls were unrolled to reveal the wisdom of Homer and Virgil, and young minds grappled with arithmetic and rhetoric. Education was highly valued in Roman society, and parents sacrificed much to ensure their children could read, write, and participate fully in the empire's sophisticated culture. The sound of children reciting their lessons was another thread in the rich tapestry of morning sounds. As the morning approached its end, Mount Vesuvius stood as it had for centuries, apparently calm, eternally watchful, yet deep within its core, pressures that had been building for years were approaching a critical point. The mountain that had blessed this region with fertility and prosperity was about to reveal its true nature. But for now, it waited in silence, like a giant holding its breath before forever changing the course of history. The fire crackles a bit lower now, dear listeners, as we settle deeper into our story. The stars above us have wheeled slightly in their ancient courses, just as they did on that morning 2,000 years ago. Can you feel the night air on your skin? Can you hear the distant call of an owl in the forest around us? We are safe here by our fire, but the people of Pompeii, their safety was about to be shattered in ways they could never have imagined. Stephanus, the fuller who cleaned and processed cloth for Pompeii's wealthy citizens, arrived at his workshop just as the sun reached its full strength. His business occupied an entire building near the Forum, with large stone basins where cloth was trampled clean by workers' feet, then rinsed in solutions of urine and clay that would seem repulsive to modern sensibilities, but produced the finest textiles in the ancient world. Today he expected delivery of a toga from Senator Hoconius's villa, garments that required the most delicate handling and his finest skills. Aulus Umbricius Scaurus, whose family had dominated Pompeii's lucrative fish sauce trade for generations, stood among the hundreds of amphorae that lined his warehouse near the harbor. But today his thoughts were on wine, not garum. The recent harvest from the Vesuvian slopes had been exceptional, and he was negotiating with merchants from Alexandria and Athens who would carry his wines to tables across the Mediterranean. The volcanic soil that nurtured the grapes was his family's greatest blessing, though he had no idea of the destruction that same volcanic power could unleash. Lucius Caesius Felix worked silver with the skill that had made his family famous throughout Campania. In his workshop near the Temple of Apollo, he carefully hammered a sheet of precious metal into a drinking cup that would bear the images of Bacchus and his followers. The silver had come from Spanish mines, brought to Pompeii by the same trade networks that made the city prosperous. Each strike of his small hammer was precise, creating details that would delight his wealthy customers and perhaps survive for millennia to come. Gaius Calventius Quietus, Pompeii's most respected physician, began his morning rounds with a visit to the villa of a wealthy patron who had been suffering from fever. His medical bag contained instruments that would seem primitive by modern standards: bronze probes, surgical knives, and various herbs whose properties had been passed down through generations of healers. Yet his understanding of anatomy and disease was sophisticated for his time, and his reputation extended even to Rome, where he had once treated members of the imperial family. At the Thermopolium of Vetusius Placidus, one of Pompeii's most popular eating establishments, the morning rush was beginning. Steam rose from bronze vessels containing hot food, while painted advertisements on the walls promised the finest wines from local vineyards. Customers crowded around the marble counter, grabbing quick meals before heading to their daily work. The tavern was a democratic institution where slaves and senators might stand side by side, united by their need for sustenance and their appreciation for good food and wine. In Pompeii's large theater, actors and stagehands prepared for the afternoon's performance of a comedy by Plautus. The theater could seat 5,000 spectators and was one of the city's great prides, representing the cultural sophistication that Romans valued as much as military conquest or commercial success. Today's play would feature mistaken identities, clever slaves, and young lovers overcoming parental opposition, themes as universal in the ancient world as they are today. Gaius Cuspius Pansa, descendant of one of Pompeii's most prominent political families, inspected the aqueduct that brought fresh water from springs in the Apennine Mountains. The engineering required to transport water across miles of countryside, through underground channels and over high bridges, represented one of Rome's greatest technological achievements. Clean water was the foundation of urban civilization, and Pompeii's abundant supply was a source of civic pride that attracted visitors from across the empire. In a small shop near the Forum, Lucius Popedius crafted perfumes from exotic ingredients brought from the far corners of the empire. Frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from Egypt, and rare flowers from distant provinces were blended according to secret formulas that had made his family wealthy. Roman men and women prized fine perfumes as much as jewelry or silk, and the scents created in this small workshop would perfume the bodies of Pompeii's elite until their final day. At the Gladiator school, trainer Marcus Masonius supervised the morning exercises of his fighters. Sand had been raked smooth in the practice area. Wooden swords were distributed, and the day's training began with the same dedication that had created champions in amphitheaters throughout the empire. These men lived with death as a daily possibility, yet they trained with fierce pride in their skills. Some were slaves who fought for freedom. Others were free men who chose the gladiator's life for its potential rewards and glory. Aulus Clodius Flaccus reviewed shipping manifests in his office overlooking Pompeii's harbor. His ships carried goods to ports throughout the Mediterranean, bringing back exotic products that filled the shops and homes of the wealthy. Today he expected arrival of a vessel from Alexandria carrying papyrus, spices, and silk, while one of his ships prepared to depart for Gaul with a cargo of wine and olive oil. The maritime trade that connected Pompeii to the wider world was the foundation of its prosperity. In his workshop near the Triangular Forum, master mosaicist Lucius Caesius Secundus carefully selected tesserae for a floor design that would depict the famous "Beware of Dog" image. Each tiny piece of stone or glass had to be precisely cut and colored to create the illusion of fur, teeth, and threatening eyes. His mosaics would outlast the empire itself, their beauty preserved beneath volcanic ash until modern archaeologists would marvel at their artistry 20 centuries later. Lucius Caecilius Jucundus, one of Pompeii's most important financial agents, reviewed contracts and accounts in his tablinum, surrounded by shelves of wax tablets and papyrus scrolls. His business involved everything from slave sales to real estate transactions, and his records would provide modern historians with invaluable insights into the economic life of a Roman city. The bronze seal on his desk bore his name and would be pressed into wax to authenticate the day's documents. Marcus Hoconius Rufus, multiple-time Duumvir, and one of Pompeii's most distinguished citizens, received his morning clients in the elegant atrium of his villa. Citizens came seeking his influence, his financial backing, or his advice on legal matters. The patron-client relationship was fundamental to Roman society, and Hoconius's generosity to the city had earned him public statues and inscriptions that celebrated his contributions to Pompeii's prosperity and culture. Verecundus, whose workshop near the Forum produced some of Pompeii's finest dyed cloth, supervised the delicate process of achieving the perfect shade of purple for a toga destined for a wealthy customer. The dye came from murex shells harvested in distant waters, and the process required precise timing and temperature control. Purple was the color of emperors and senators, and even a small amount of true purple dye was worth more than gold. Gaius Gavius Rufus walked through the peristyle garden of his villa, planning improvements that would make it even more beautiful for the dinner party he was hosting next month. Roman gardens were outdoor rooms where families gathered for meals, relaxation, and conversation. His garden featured a central fountain, flowering plants arranged in geometric patterns, and shaded walkways that provided relief from the Mediterranean heat. The garden was his pride, a place where nature and human artistry achieved perfect harmony. Near the theater district, Gaius Norbanus practiced the complex rhythms required for the afternoon's theatrical performance. His instruments, a double flute, various percussion devices, and a small lyre, would provide the musical accompaniment that was essential to Roman drama. Music was highly valued in Roman culture, both for its entertainment value and its role in religious ceremonies. Today's performance would showcase musical traditions that connected Pompeii to the great cultural centers of Athens and Alexandria. As the sun reached its full height, the night watch completed their final rounds and prepared to hand over responsibility to the day guards. Pompeii was a safe city by ancient standards, but vigilance was still necessary to prevent theft, settle disputes, and maintain the public order that allowed commerce and culture to flourish. The guards who had walked the streets all night would soon seek their beds, unaware that this was the last normal day shift change their city would ever experience. High on the slopes of Vesuvius, Gaius Appidius Rufus supervised workers harvesting the late summer grapes that would become wine prized throughout the empire. The volcanic soil was incredibly fertile, producing yields that amazed visitors from other regions. The mountain seemed like a benevolent deity, providing everything needed for agricultural prosperity. The workers sang as they collected the perfect grapes, their voices carrying across slopes that would soon be covered with death instead of vines. By late morning, Pompeii hummed with the activities that had characterized successful Roman cities for centuries. The forum buzzed with commercial and political activity. Workshops produced goods that would be shipped across the Mediterranean. Children attended schools where they learned the classics of Greek and Latin literature, and families prepared for the midday meal that was the center of domestic life. It was a city at the height of its prosperity, confident in its future, blessed by its location, and utterly unprepared for what was about to begin. Mount Vesuvius stood magnificent and seemingly peaceful above the city, its slopes green with vegetation, its peak wrapped in the morning mist that often gathered around high elevations. Yet deep within the mountain, forces beyond human comprehension were reaching a critical point. The magma chamber that had been slowly filling for decades was finally ready to unleash its contents. The mountain's long sleep was about to end with a violence that would reshape the landscape and provide the world with its most famous example of volcanic destruction. As the sun reached its zenith on that August day, casting short shadows on the forum and heating the stones of Roman roads until they were almost too hot to touch with bare feet, life in Pompeii continued its timeless rhythm. The morning's minor tremors had been forgotten, dismissed as part of the natural order in this geologically active region, where small earthquakes were as common as thunderstorms. Market stalls were busy with the midday trade. Children played in shaded courtyards, while their parents took the traditional Roman rest period, and the wealthy retreated to the cool interior rooms of their villas to escape the heat. No one could have imagined that in mere moments, their world would begin to end in fire and darkness. At approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sun was at its highest point and the heat shimmered off the stone pavements like water, a violent tremor shook the city far more powerfully than any earthquake in living memory. The tremor lasted only seconds, but its effects were immediate and terrifying. Walls that had stood for generations developed visible cracks. Statues of gods and emperors toppled from their pedestals and shattered on marble floors, and oil lamps crashed down, spilling burning oil across wooden tables and woven rugs. In Marcus's bakery, loaves of bread that had been cooling on wooden shelves tumbled to the floor, and the great stone ovens that had been built into the walls shifted ominously, their mortar joints splitting with sounds like breaking bones. People staggered in the streets, reaching desperately for walls and columns to steady themselves, their faces showing the first touch of the fear that would soon become absolute terror. This was no ordinary earthquake. This was the mountain's first great warning that its long sleep was ending. High on Vesuvius's summit, 1,500 feet above the city that had grown complacent in its shadow, a crack appeared in the mountain's peak with a sound like thunder that echoed across the entire Bay of Naples. The crack was small at first, barely visible from the city below, but it widened with each passing moment as the mountain's internal pressure found its outlet. Steam began to hiss from the opening, carrying with it the unmistakable sulfurous smell of the underworld that Romans associated with volcanic regions, but in quantities and intensity that no living person had ever experienced. The white plume that rose from the crack was small at first, no larger than the smoke from a kitchen fire, but it grew with frightening speed, climbing straight up into the clear blue sky like a column of ghostly marble. The mountain that had slept peacefully for over 8 centuries, longer than any human memory or recorded history, was finally awakening, and its awakening would be violent beyond imagination. Across the Bay of Naples, in the Roman naval base at Misenum, where the imperial fleet anchored when not patrolling the Mediterranean, 18-year-old Gaius Plinius Caecilius Secundus, known to history as Pliny the Younger, looked up from his copy of Livy's histories to see something that would haunt him for the rest of his life and provide posterity with the most detailed eyewitness account of one of history's greatest natural disasters. A cloud was rising from the direction of Vesuvius, but unlike any cloud he had ever seen in his young life spent around the Mediterranean, it climbed straight up into the sky like a massive pine tree, its trunk dark and perfectly vertical, its crown spreading wide across the heavens like the branches of a tree that could shade entire cities. The young man, nephew to the famous naturalist Pliny the Elder, who commanded the fleet at Misenum, had been educated in rhetoric and philosophy, trained to observe carefully and describe precisely, but no amount of education could have prepared him for what he was witnessing. Years later, he would write to the historian Tacitus, describing this moment when the world changed forever, and his words would be our most important window into this day of terror and wonder. In Pompeii itself, the sight of the eruption column growing above their beloved mountain sent waves of panic through the population like ripples spreading from a stone thrown into still water. Some people ran immediately toward the harbor, hoping to escape by sea before the situation could worsen, their sandals slapping against stone pavements as they clutched children and precious possessions. Others gathered their most valuable belongings and headed for the city gates, joining streams of refugees that would soon clog the roads leading away from the mountain. But many stood transfixed in the streets and forums, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing, their minds refusing to accept that the mountain that had been their protector and provider for so many generations was transforming before their eyes into something monstrous and threatening. Conversations stopped in mid-sentence, merchants abandoned their stalls, children stopped their games to stare upward at the growing column of darkness that was blotting out the sun. Within an hour of the initial crack appearing on the mountain's summit, the column of ash, gas, and pulverized rock had climbed an incredible 20 miles into the sky, reaching heights where the air is so thin that birds cannot fly, and where the temperature drops far below freezing, even on the hottest summer day. At this altitude, nearly 4 times higher than modern passenger jets fly, the column began to spread outward under its own weight, creating the distinctive umbrella pine shape that Pliny had observed from across the bay. The sheer scale of this eruption was beyond any human experience in recorded history. The mountain was ejecting material with the force of hundreds of atomic bombs, hurling rock and ash into the stratosphere at speeds that defied comprehension. The energy being released was equivalent to the explosion of millions of tons of dynamite. Yet this was only the beginning of Vesuvius's fury. By mid-afternoon, when the sun should have been at its brightest but was now obscured by the towering column of volcanic debris, the first ash began to fall on Pompeii like gray snow in the height of summer. At first, the ash was light and almost beautiful, individual flakes drifting down from the dark cloud above to coat the red roof tiles and white marble columns with a fine gray dust that sparkled strangely in the filtered sunlight. Children reached out to catch the strange flakes, marveling at this unprecedented sight that seemed like a gift from the gods, while their parents watched with growing unease. But the ash continued to fall, and fall, and fall, with no sign of stopping. What had seemed magical and wonderful quickly became ominous as the ash began to accumulate on roofs, adding dangerous weight to structures never designed to bear such loads, settling in gardens where flowers and vegetables began to wither under the unnatural blanket, and filling the air with particles that made breathing increasingly difficult and dangerous. Marcus stood in the doorway of his bakery, watching gray ash drift through his windows like a macabre parody of the flour he worked with every day of his life. His ovens, still warm from the morning's baking, were slowly cooling as ash settled on everything he had worked his entire life to build. The wooden tables, where 3 generations of his family had kneaded bread, were now covered with volcanic dust, and the sweet smell of fresh bread was being replaced by the acrid odor of sulfur and ash. His wife, Claudia, urged him to leave immediately, to take their children and flee the city while the roads were still passable and before the ashfall became heavier. But this bakery was everything to him, not just his livelihood, but his identity, his connection to his father and grandfather, his contribution to the community that had supported his family for decades. How could he abandon it all? How could he walk away from everything that gave his life meaning? The decision that faced Marcus was the same that confronted every resident of Pompeii in those crucial hours. Stay and protect what they had built, or flee into an uncertain future with nothing but the clothes on their backs. As the afternoon wore on and the ash fall continued to intensify, the eruption itself grew more violent with each passing hour. The column now reached even higher into the atmosphere, and volcanic lightning began to crackle within the ash cloud, creating an otherworldly display of blue and white fire against the darkening sky. The lightning was caused by the friction of billions of ash particles rubbing against each other as they were hurled skyward, creating electrical charges that discharged in spectacular and terrifying bolts that illuminated the growing darkness. The sound was now constant and overwhelming, a deep, rumbling roar like an endless waterfall mixed with the crack of thunder, punctuated by explosive booms that could be felt as much as heard, making the ground shake and windows rattle throughout the city. The mountain was venting its fury with increasing intensity, and those who remained in Pompeii began to understand that this was not a temporary phenomenon that would soon pass, but the beginning of something far more catastrophic than anyone had imagined possible. The roads leading away from Pompeii toward the surrounding countryside and distant cities began to fill with refugees carrying whatever possessions they could manage in their desperate flight from the mountain's wrath. Carts loaded with household goods creaked under the weight of hastily packed lives. Bronze vessels, precious scrolls, jewelry, and clothing, thrown together without regard for organization or value. Families walked together through the falling ash, children clinging to their parents' hands, elderly relatives supported by younger family members, all of them looking back repeatedly at the only home they had ever known as it disappeared behind them in the gray haze. Some of these refugees would survive their journey to safety, reaching distant cities where they would live to tell their stories to children and grandchildren who would barely believe such tales of destruction. Others would be overtaken by the mountain's wrath before they could travel far enough to escape, their abandoned carts and scattered possessions becoming archaeological evidence of desperate final journeys. Every step away from the city was a step towards survival, but many residents could not bring themselves to take those steps, could not abandon everything they had worked for, everything that made their lives meaningful. In the Gladiator barracks near the large theater, Gaius Appuleius Diocles faced the most important decision of his life, more crucial even than any choice he had made in the deadly arena where he had fought for the entertainment of Pompeii's citizens. The thick stone walls of his prison had initially protected him and his fellow gladiators from the worst of the ashfall, but they were also keeping him trapped while the situation outside grew increasingly desperate. Some of his fellow gladiators spoke in hushed, urgent tones about breaking down the doors that held them captive about fighting their way to freedom regardless of the consequences they might face if they survived this catastrophe. Others argued for staying put, believing that the massive stone building would protect them from whatever was happening outside, that their Roman masters would surely return to free them once the immediate danger had passed. Gaius fingered the small bronze amulet his mother had given him years ago, before he was captured in Gaul and sold into slavery, before he learned to kill other men for the amusement of crowds. The amulet bore the image of Epona, the Celtic horse goddess who protected travelers, and as he touched it, he thought of the open fields of his homeland, of clean air and blue skies, of freedom that he had almost forgotten after years of captivity. The decision he made in the next few minutes would determine whether he ever saw those fields again, whether he would die as a slave in a stone prison or as a free man under the open sky. In her modest home near the theater district, Julia held her children close as ash continued to fall outside their shuttered windows, the fine particles finding their way through every crack and crevice, despite her efforts to seal their dwelling against the strange gray snow. Little Marcus, barely 6 years old, coughed repeatedly as the fine particles irritated his throat and lungs, while 8-year-old Claudia asked again and again when the strange snow would stop, when their father would return from his journey to the countryside, when their world would return to normal. The house that had been their sanctuary, their safe refuge from the dangers and uncertainties of the outside world, was slowly becoming a trap as ash accumulated on the roof, adding dangerous weight to a structure that had never been designed to bear such loads. Julia's husband, Marcus Epidius, had left 2 days earlier to oversee the grape harvest at their small vineyard on the mountain slopes, planning to return this evening with good news about the quality of this year's vintage. But would he be able to return through the chaos that now gripped the region? And would their home still be standing when he arrived? Or would the accumulated weight of ash cause the roof to collapse before he could reach them? At Pompeii's harbor, where merchant ships had arrived that very morning loaded with goods from across the Mediterranean, chaos now reigned as hundreds of desperate people sought passage on any vessel that could carry them away from the doomed city and the mountain that was destroying it. Ship captains, many of them visitors to Pompeii, who had no particular loyalty to its residents, found themselves in the terrible position of choosing who would live and who would die, as their boats could not possibly accommodate all who sought escape from the volcanic catastrophe. Some captains demanded enormous payments for passage, enriching themselves from others' desperation, while others tried to be fair, taking families with children first or choosing passengers by lottery. The sea itself was becoming increasingly dangerous as the volcanic activity was causing unusual waves and currents, stirring up the normally calm waters of the bay and making navigation treacherous even for experienced sailors. Some ships that attempted to leave the harbor were driven back to shore by the turbulent waters, and the increasing darkness caused by the ash cloud, their passengers forced to seek shelter on land that was itself becoming increasingly uninhabitable with each passing hour. In the magnificent villa of Lucius Caesius Secundus, one of Pompeii's wealthiest wine merchants, servants worked frantically to pack the family's most valuable possessions, while ash continued to fall steadily into the beautiful peristyle garden that had been the pride of the household. Silver plates that had graced dinner parties attended by senators and wealthy visitors from Rome were hastily wrapped in linen and loaded into wooden chests. Precious scrolls containing the works of Homer, Virgil, and other classical authors were carefully protected from the ash that was beginning to infiltrate even the interior rooms of the house. Jewelry, coins, and small bronze statues were gathered into leather bags that could be easily carried during the family's planned escape to their secondary villa in the countryside far from the mountain. The beautiful frescoes that had taken master artists months to complete were being slowly coated with gray dust, their vibrant colors muted by the mountain's relentless assault. Lucius supervised the evacuation with the calm efficiency that had made him successful in business and politics, but even his practiced composure could not hide the fear in his eyes as he watched his life's work disappearing under the inexorable fall of volcanic ash. In the temples of Pompeii, where the gods had been worshipped according to ancient traditions for centuries, priests conducted increasingly desperate rituals, appealing to Jupiter, Venus, Apollo, and all the other deities to spare their beloved city from destruction. The temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, which dominated the northern end of the forum and served as the religious center of civic life, was now filled with ash that filtered through openings in the roof, settling on marble altars and priceless religious artifacts. The sacred flames that had burned continuously for generations, tended by devoted priests who considered their maintenance a sacred duty, flickered and threatened to die as ash infiltrated even the most protected spaces. Offerings of wine, incense, and precious objects were made with unusual urgency, as if the gods needed to be reminded of their faithful servants' devotion and the city's long history of proper religious observance. But the mountain continued its relentless eruption, seemingly deaf to human prayers and pleas, apparently unmoved by the desperate appeals of people who had always believed that proper religious observance would protect them from natural disasters. The gods, if they were listening at all, had apparently decided that Pompeii's time had come to an end, that the city's destiny was to become a warning to future generations about the awesome power of natural forces. As the sun began to set on August 24th, 79 AD, it was barely visible through the thick column of ash that now towered miles above Mount Vesuvius, spreading across the sky like a giant umbrella that blocked out the natural light and created an unnatural twilight hours before darkness should have fallen. The city was shrouded in an eerie gray gloom that made navigation difficult and gave even familiar streets an alien, threatening appearance. Oil lamps and torches were lit throughout the city, their flickering flames providing the only illumination in a world gone gray and threatening. But even these lights struggled against the constantly falling ash that coated their wicks and dimmed their glow. The ashfall had now reached several inches in depth, making walking difficult and breathing increasingly hazardous for anyone who remained outside for extended periods. Those who still remained in the city huddled in their homes, pressing cloth against their faces to filter the air, wondering if they would live to see another dawn, listening to the constant roar of the mountain that seemed to grow louder and more threatening with each passing hour. The mountain that had given them life and prosperity was now determined to take it all away, and there seemed to be nothing that human courage, ingenuity, or faith could do to stop it. The sound of Vesuvius in full eruption was unlike anything in normal human experience. A deep, constant, rumbling roar that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth, punctuated by explosive cracks and booms that made buildings shake and sent terrified birds fleeing from their roosts in panic. It was the sound of incredible geological forces being unleashed, of solid rock being torn apart and hurled skyward by pressures that had been building for decades, of a mountain literally destroying itself in order to destroy everything around it. Those who had lived through other volcanic eruptions in distant parts of the empire would later say that nothing could have prepared them for the sheer volume and intensity of Vesuvius at the height of its fury. It was a sound that penetrated not just the ears, but the entire body, that could be felt in the chest and stomach as much as heard, that seemed to announce the end of the world itself. Mixed with the mountain's roar were the human sounds of a city in panic, screaming voices, crying children, the crash of collapsing buildings, the rumble of carts and wagons as people fled through streets that were becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. As darkness fell over Pompeii, on what would prove to be the last normal evening in the city's history, its remaining citizens faced the most crucial choice of their lives, a decision that would determine not just their immediate survival, but how their stories would be remembered and told for thousands of years to come. The city gates were still open, the roads still passable, though increasingly difficult to traverse through the deepening ash, and escape was still possible for those willing to abandon everything they had worked for and venture into an uncertain night. Some families made the agonizing decision to leave their homes, their businesses, their possessions, and their familiar surroundings, gathering whatever they could carry, and joining the streams of refugees heading away from the mountain and toward distant safety. Others chose to remain in their homes, believing that the solid Roman construction that had sheltered them through earthquakes, storms, and other natural disasters would continue to protect them, trusting in walls and roofs that had stood for generations. They could not have known that their choice would determine not just their survival, but whether they would become victims of one of history's greatest natural disasters, or witnesses to human courage in the face of cosmic forces beyond human control. Through the ash-darkened night, Mount Vesuvius glowed with internal fires like a gateway to the underworld itself, its peak wreathed in flames and lightning that illuminated the massive column of ash and gas, still climbing toward the stars. The eruption column, now invisible against the black sky, except when lit by the spectacular displays of volcanic lightning, continued to climb toward heights that seemed to touch the heavens themselves. The mountain had been venting its fury for 12 hours now, longer than most volcanic eruptions in recorded history, but there were no signs that its anger was diminishing. Instead, deep within the mountain's core, even more catastrophic forces were preparing to unleash themselves upon the helpless cities below. The Plinian eruption that had been devastating Pompeii and the surrounding region since midday was merely the prelude to something far worse, far more deadly than anything the ancient world had ever experienced. The mountain was preparing to deliver its killing blow, to demonstrate that all human achievements, no matter how impressive or enduring they might seem, were ultimately powerless against the awesome forces that shaped the earth itself. Our campfire has burned lower now, dear friends, casting dancing shadows on the trees that surround our peaceful clearing in this quiet forest. The night air carries the clean scent of pine needles and wood smoke, so different from the sulfur and ash that filled the air of Pompeii on that terrible night 2,000 years ago. Listen carefully. Can you hear the gentle sounds of our forest sanctuary? An owl calling somewhere in the distance, its voice carrying across the darkness. The whisper of wind through the pine branches above us. The quiet crackling and popping of our fire as it settles into glowing embers. These are the sounds of peace, of safety, of a world where volcanic mountains sleep quietly and cities do not vanish in single days. Let these comforting sounds surround you as we continue our journey back through time, witnessing events that ended 20 centuries ago, events that cannot reach across the vast span of time to touch us here in our protected clearing under the eternal, watching stars. To understand what was happening beneath Mount Vesuvius during those terrible hours, we must imagine forces that dwarf anything in ordinary human experience. Deep beneath the mountain, a chamber filled with molten rock had been slowly expanding for decades, fed by the movement of tectonic plates that pushed the African continent slowly northward against Europe. The pressure in this chamber had been building like a giant balloon being inflated beyond its capacity, and the relatively small vents that had opened on August 24th were insufficient to relieve the enormous pressures that had accumulated over years of geological tension. The magma itself was particularly dangerous, not the flowing, relatively gentle lava that characterizes Hawaiian eruptions, but a thick, gas-filled mixture that would explode with tremendous violence when it finally found its way to the surface. Modern scientists understand that this type of eruption, now called Plinian after Pliny the Younger, who described it so eloquently, represents one of the most destructive forces in nature, capable of devastating entire regions and affecting global climate patterns. The buildings of Pompeii, for all their beauty and sophisticated engineering, were not designed to withstand the type of assault that Vesuvius was unleashing upon them. Roman construction techniques, perfected over centuries of building in a generally stable environment, used flat or gently sloped roofs that were excellent for the Mediterranean climate, but poorly suited to supporting the weight of accumulating volcanic debris. As the ashfall continued through the night, reaching depths of several feet in some areas, roofs throughout the city began to groan under loads they had never been designed to bear. The ash was not light like snow, but heavy and dense, saturated with moisture from the steam that accompanied the eruption. A roof that could easily support the weight of people walking on it might collapse under 6 feet of wet volcanic ash, and many buildings that had survived earthquakes and storms for generations would not survive this unprecedented test of their structural integrity. The decisions that Pompeii's residents made during those crucial hours reflect the complex psychology of people facing unprecedented disaster. Many found it psychologically impossible to believe that their familiar world could end so suddenly and completely. Others were paralyzed by the sheer scale of the catastrophe, unable to process what was happening or make rational decisions about their survival. Some displayed remarkable courage and clear thinking, helping neighbors and strangers even at risk to their own lives. The normalcy bias that affects all humans in crisis situations led many to believe that the situation would improve, that the eruption would stop, that their city would survive as it had survived other natural disasters in the past. These were not failures of character, but natural human responses to situations beyond normal experience. Responses that help us understand why archaeological evidence shows that many victims were found in their homes, apparently waiting for the danger to pass, rather than fleeing to safety while escape was still possible. Throughout the region around Vesuvius, animals displayed the instinctive behavior that often allows them to survive natural disasters that claim human lives. Dogs, cats, horses, and livestock showed signs of extreme agitation hours before the eruption began, as their sensitive hearing detected underground rumblings and their acute sense of smell identified gases seeping from the earth that humans could not perceive. Birds fled the area in large flocks, abandoning their nests and territories in response to some primordial warning system that told them danger was approaching. Wild animals that normally stayed hidden during daylight hours could be seen moving through the countryside in broad daylight, fleeing toward areas farther from the mountain. Even insects and small creatures seemed to sense the coming catastrophe, abandoning their normal habitats and moving away from Vesuvius in patterns that would have warned observant humans if anyone had been watching carefully enough to understand what the animal behavior meant. The roads leading away from Pompeii and the other cities in Vesuvius's shadow filled with refugees throughout the afternoon and evening of August 24th, creating streams of desperate humanity fleeing toward uncertain safety. Families traveled together when possible, but the chaos of the evacuation separated many groups, leaving children searching for parents and elderly relatives struggling to keep up with younger family members. The fortunate had carts or wagons to carry their possessions and the infirm, but many traveled on foot, carrying only what they could manage while walking through increasingly difficult conditions. Some refugees would walk for days before reaching areas far enough from the mountain to be truly safe, sleeping in fields or forests, dependent on the kindness of strangers in distant towns who opened their homes to the displaced. Others would not travel far enough fast enough and would be overtaken by the mountain's final, most deadly assault. The archaeological evidence of their journeys, abandoned carts, scattered possessions, and human remains found along the ancient roads, tells the story of desperate flight and the arbitrary nature of survival during natural disasters. Pompeii was not the only city suffering under Vesuvius's assault. Herculaneum, smaller but equally prosperous, lay even closer to the mountain's base and would face an even more terrible fate. Stabiae, Nola, and other communities throughout the region experienced their own versions of the catastrophe, each with their own stories of human courage and tragedy. The eruption was affecting the entire Bay of Naples region, disrupting trade routes, destroying agricultural areas, and forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes. The economic and social disruption would last for years, as the most prosperous region of southern Italy struggled to recover from the loss of entire cities and the displacement of massive populations. Some communities would rebuild and prosper again, but others would never recover, their residents scattered to distant provinces of the empire, their contributions to Roman civilization lost forever. News of the catastrophe was already spreading throughout the Roman Empire, carried by ships that had fled the Bay of Naples, and by refugees who brought word to distant cities of the unprecedented disaster that had befallen one of the empire's most prosperous regions. In Rome itself, Emperor Titus received reports of the eruption with grave concern, understanding that the loss of Pompeii and its surrounding agricultural areas would have serious economic and political consequences for the empire. Roman administrative efficiency, legendary throughout the ancient world, would soon organize relief efforts for the survivors and refugees, but the scale of the disaster was beyond anything the imperial government had ever faced. The eruption would ultimately contribute to financial pressures that affected imperial policy for years to come, demonstrating how natural disasters could influence the course of political history in ways that military defeats or economic problems alone could not achieve. As the night of August 24th deepened, Pompeii lay buried under several feet of ash and pumice, its familiar landmarks obscured or completely hidden by the volcanic debris that continued to fall without any sign of stopping. The city that had awakened that morning as a thriving center of Roman civilization was now a gray wasteland where the normal patterns of urban life had completely collapsed. Streets were impassable, buildings were collapsing under the weight of accumulated ash, and the air itself had become dangerous to breathe. Those residents who had chosen to remain in their homes found themselves trapped in structures that were becoming tombs, unable to escape through doors and windows blocked by debris, slowly suffocating in air filled with toxic particles. The darkness was complete except for the occasional fire that broke out when oil lamps were overturned or when collapsed buildings exposed their contents to volcanic heat. It was a darkness more absolute than any normal night, a darkness that seemed to swallow light itself and muffle even the loudest sounds. Mount Vesuvius showed no signs of exhaustion as it continued its assault on the surrounding landscape throughout the long night of August 24th. The mountain had been erupting continuously for over 12 hours, expending energy equivalent to thousands of atomic bombs. Yet it seemed to have inexhaustible reserves of destruction, still waiting to be unleashed. Modern volcanologists understand that Plinian eruptions can continue for days or even weeks, sustained by the enormous pressures that build up in magma chambers over decades or centuries. The mountain was not just emptying its current contents, but was tapping into deep reservoirs of molten rock that ensured the eruption would continue until these underground chambers were finally exhausted. For the people trapped in Pompeii and the surrounding areas, this meant that their ordeal was far from over, that the worst was yet to come, and that survival would depend not just on escaping the current dangers, but on staying ahead of whatever new horrors the mountain might unleash in the hours and days ahead. Near midnight on August 24th, as most of the Roman world slept peacefully unaware of the catastrophe unfolding in Campania, the character of Vesuvius's eruption changed once again in a way that would prove far more deadly than anything that had come before. The towering column that had been climbing steadily into the sky for nearly 12 hours, reaching heights that seemed to touch the stars themselves, began to collapse under its own enormous weight. Millions of tons of superheated rock, ash, and gas that had been suspended in the atmosphere by the incredible upward force of the eruption could no longer be supported by the weakening volcanic jet, and gravity began to reclaim this vast cloud of destruction. What happened next was the birth of pyroclastic flows, walls of superheated death that would race down the mountain slopes at speeds approaching 100 miles per hour, faster than any human could run, hotter than any fire that had ever burned in Pompeii's hearths or forges. These flows, as modern scientists would eventually name them, were avalanches of gas and rock heated to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to instantly incinerate everything in their path, moving with such speed and violence that they would reshape the very landscape they crossed. The mountain's final assault on the cities below had begun, and this assault would be swift, merciless, and absolutely unstoppable. The first pyroclastic flow to break free from the collapsing eruption column struck the seaside city of Herculaneum with such speed and violence that most of its inhabitants had no time to react, no opportunity to flee, no chance to save themselves or their loved ones from the wall of superheated death that descended upon their city like the wrath of angry gods. Herculaneum, smaller than Pompeii but equally beautiful and prosperous, had been experiencing the same ashfall that plagued all the cities in Vesuvius's shadow, but its residents had had no warning of the far more deadly threat that was racing toward them down the mountain's northwestern slopes. The superheated gas and rock, reaching temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, moved through the city like a liquid avalanche of fire, filling every street, every building, every space where life had flourished just moments before. Unlike Pompeii, which would be buried gradually under layers of ash and pumice that preserved many buildings and artifacts, Herculaneum was obliterated in minutes, its structures filled with volcanic material that hardened into rock-like consistency, creating a preservation so complete that modern archaeologists would find bread still sitting on tables, scrolls still readable in libraries, and human bodies preserved in perfect detail. In seconds, a thriving Roman city became a tomb sealed in volcanic stone, its 15,000 residents killed so quickly that most had no time to suffer, their lives ending in an instant of unimaginable heat. In his bakery, on the Via dell'Abbondanza, Marcus Attilius had made his choice to stay, to remain with the business that represented 3 generations of his family's work and dedication to their community. The ash was now several feet deep outside his door, and the weight on his roof was becoming dangerous, causing the wooden beams to creak ominously with each new layer of volcanic debris. His wife and children had left hours earlier, joining the streams of refugees heading away from the city, but Marcus had remained behind, unable to abandon the ovens where his grandfather had first taught him to knead dough, the tables where his father had shown him the secrets of perfect bread, the shop where he had planned to teach his own son the ancient craft of baking. He sat quietly beside his ovens, still radiating warmth from the morning's fires that seemed like they had been lit in another lifetime, another world where Mount Vesuvius was a benevolent provider rather than a destroyer. The oil lamp beside him flickered in the increasingly heavy air, its flame dancing like a tiny spirit, refusing to surrender to the darkness that was slowly claiming his city. As the sounds of the mountain grew closer and more ominous, Marcus closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to Vesta, goddess of hearth and home, thanking her for the years of prosperity and happiness his family had known in this place, asking her to watch over his wife and children in whatever future awaited them beyond this night of terror. In her home near the theater district, Julia Claudia had gathered her children into the strongest corner of their house, the place where the walls met and the roof beams were most solidly supported, creating a small sanctuary within their increasingly dangerous dwelling. Little Marcus had stopped coughing and lay quietly against her chest, his breathing shallow but peaceful as exhaustion overcame his fear of the strange gray snow that continued to fall outside their shuttered windows. 8-year-old Claudia whispered questions about when Papa would return from his journey to the countryside, when the ash would stop falling, when their world would return to the familiar patterns of Roman life they had known since birth. Julia sang softly to them, the same lullabies her own mother had sung to her when she was small, the ancient melodies that connected mothers and children across generations and cultures, songs that spoke of protection and love, and the eternal human desire to shield the innocent from the harsh realities of an uncertain world. Outside their small refuge, the world was ending in fire and ash, but inside their embrace, love continued to exist. Maternal devotion continued to provide comfort, and the bonds between family members proved stronger than fear. She knew with the intuition that comes to mothers in times of crisis that her husband would not return, that the ash was too deep now for travel, that the air had become too poisonous for anyone to survive long in the open. But she could give her children peace in what might be their final moments together. And that gift of love was enough to make meaning from meaningless destruction, to create beauty in the midst of cosmic horror. Gaius Appuleius Diocles had made his decision with the clarity that comes to warriors who have faced death many times and learned to act decisively when survival depends on swift action. Using his gladiator's strength, developed through years of training for mortal combat in the arena, he broke down the wooden door of the barracks that had held him and his fellow prisoners captive while the city died around them. The sound of splintering wood was lost in the constant roar of the mountain, but it represented something far more significant than mere escape. It was the sound of a slave choosing to die as a free man, of a prisoner refusing to let circumstances beyond his control determine his final moments. Some of his fellow gladiators headed immediately for the city gates, hoping to outrun the mountain's wrath and reach safety in the countryside beyond Vesuvius's reach. But Gaius turned toward the residential district, where he had once seen a family with young children during his brief periods of freedom between fights, people who had shown him small kindnesses when Roman law required none. If he was going to die this night, he would die helping others, using the strength that had made him deadly in the arena for a nobler purpose than entertaining crowds with violence. The training that had taught him to kill other men efficiently would now serve to save lives, to carry children too small to walk through the deepening ash, to help elderly citizens who had been abandoned in the chaos of a city's final hours. At Pompeii's harbor, where the business of international trade had continued until just hours earlier, the final ships capable of sailing in the increasingly treacherous conditions had departed into the darkness, their holds packed far beyond safe capacity, with refugees who had paid enormous sums or offered their most precious possessions for passage away from the doomed city. The captains who remained faced impossible decisions as dozens of desperate families crowded the docks, begging for passage on vessels that were already dangerously overloaded. The sea itself had become an enemy, as the volcanic activity was creating unusual currents and wave patterns that made navigation hazardous even for the most experienced sailors, while the constant fall of ash was reducing visibility to mere yards and coating ship rigging with material that added dangerous weight to vessels struggling against hostile waters. Those left behind on the docks faced a terrible choice that crystallized the arbitrary nature of survival during natural disasters. Attempt to swim through the increasingly rough waters of the bay, hoping to reach ships anchored farther from shore, or return to the city that was being buried alive under tons of volcanic debris. Some chose the sea, disappearing into the darkness and the waves that crashed against the ash-covered shore with unusual violence, their fate unknown but almost certainly tragic. Others turned back toward Pompeii, preferring to face their end on familiar ground rather than in the cold embrace of the Mediterranean, walking slowly through streets they had known since childhood, returning to homes that might not survive the night. Lucius Caesius Secundus stood in the peristyle courtyard of his magnificent villa one last time, watching ash fall on the marble statues of gods and emperors that had been his pride, on the flowering plants that had made his garden famous throughout the region, on the fountains whose musical splashing had provided the soundtrack to countless dinner parties where senators and wealthy merchants had gathered to discuss business and politics. The wagons loaded with his portable wealth, silver vessels, precious scrolls, jewelry, and coins, had departed hours ago with his family and most trusted servants, but he had remained behind, unable to abandon the home where he had been so happy. where his children had learned to walk in these same corridors, where his wife had created a domestic paradise that was envied by visitors from Rome itself. Now, as the ash reached his knees and made walking increasingly difficult, as the sounds from Vesuvius grew more ominous and the darkness became more complete, he finally understood that no amount of wealth could save him from the mountain's wrath, that all his success in business and politics was meaningless in the face of geological forces that recognized no difference between rich and poor, powerful and powerless. He placed his hand one final time on the head of a statue of Mercury, god of merchants and protector of those who built their lives on trade and commerce, whispered a farewell to the beautiful home that had represented the pinnacle of Roman domestic life, and walked slowly into the ash-filled night toward an uncertain fate. In the temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, which dominated the northern end of Pompeii's forum and served as the spiritual center of civic life, the priests continued their sacred vigil, even as ash poured through openings in the roof and threatened to extinguish the eternal flame that had burned continuously for generations. Marcus Holconius Rufus, the senior priest whose family had served the gods of Pompeii for over a century, fed the sacred fire with precious oils and rare incense brought from the far corners of the empire, determined that the gods should not be abandoned in the city's darkest hour, that the religious traditions which had sustained the community through wars, plagues, and natural disasters should continue until the very end. As the youngest priest collapsed from breathing the increasingly poisonous air, overcome by the toxic gases that accompanied the volcanic ash, the eldest members of the religious community continued the ritual prayers that had been spoken in this sacred space for hundreds of years, their voices growing weaker, but never faltering in their devotion to duty. When archaeologists would discover this temple many centuries later, they would find the priests' remains still at their posts, their bronze ritual implements still in their hands, faithful to their sacred obligations, until death itself released them from their vows. Their dedication would stand as testimony to the power of faith and duty to sustain human dignity, even in the face of cosmic forces beyond human understanding or control. In the early hours of August 25th, as the Roman world began to stir toward what should have been another ordinary dawn, a second pyroclastic flow, larger and more powerful than the devastating torrent that had obliterated Herculaneum, began its deadly race down the southern and eastern slopes of Mount Vesuvius. This flow was heading directly for Pompeii, following the natural contours of the landscape, with the inevitability of water flowing downhill, carrying with it the accumulated force of millions of tons of superheated gas and pulverized rock that had been building pressure throughout the long night of eruption. The flow moved like a ground-hugging avalanche of fire, traveling faster than the swiftest horse could gallop, hotter than any forged fire, more massive than any army that had ever marched across the Roman world. It was a wall of death, perhaps 50 feet high, glowing with its own internal heat, illuminated by volcanic lightning that crackled through the superheated gas cloud like the weapons of angry gods. The few remaining residents of Pompeii had perhaps minutes to live, though most would never see the flow coming through the thick darkness created by the ash cloud that had been falling for nearly 18 hours. Nothing in human experience could have prepared them for this final assault. Nothing in their understanding of the natural world could have made them comprehend the forces that were about to end their civilization in a matter of moments. On the walls of Pompeii, where Roman engineers had built fortifications designed to protect the city from human enemies, the night watchman, Gaius Cuspius Pansa, maintained his post even though he was probably the only person left alive in this section of the city. The ash was chest deep now, and breathing required tremendous effort as each inhalation brought toxic particles into lungs that were never meant to process such contaminated air. But he had sworn an oath to protect the city and its people, and that oath meant something even when the city was dying, and most of its people had fled or perished. With his oil lamp held high against the supernatural darkness that had fallen over the land, he scanned the horizon one last time, looking for threats that would never come from human armies, watching for enemies that could be fought with swords and shields, rather than the cosmic force that was destroying everything he had spent his life protecting. The greatest enemy had come from the mountain itself, from the earth that was supposed to be stable and trustworthy. And against this foe, all human vigilance was useless, all military preparation meaningless. Yet he remained at his post, a testament to duty and honor in the face of forces beyond human control, representing the Roman virtues of loyalty and dedication that had built an empire but could not save a single city from the wrath of nature unleashed. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning of August 25th, 79 AD, 18 hours after the first crack had appeared in Mount Vesuvius' summit, the second pyroclastic flow reached the outskirts of Pompeii and swept through the city with a speed and violence that defied human comprehension. In moments that seemed both eternal and instantaneous, the flow filled every street, every building, every space where human life had existed, moving through the urban landscape like a river of superheated death that recognized no obstacles and respected no human achievements. The superheated gas and rock, reaching temperatures that could melt bronze and shatter marble, instantly killed any living creature it encountered, while simultaneously preserving their forms in volcanic material that would harden into stone-like consistency. Buildings that had survived earthquakes and storms for generations were filled to their rooftops with volcanic debris, their contents buried but perfectly preserved, creating time capsules that would wait 17 centuries to tell their stories to archaeologists who could barely comprehend the forces that had created such perfect preservation. The city that had awakened 24 hours earlier as a thriving center of Roman civilization, home to 30,000 people with their individual hopes and dreams and daily struggles, ended its existence as a geological formation, a layer of volcanic rock that would be invisible to future generations, until scientific curiosity and systematic excavation revealed the human tragedy preserved beneath. By dawn on August 25th, 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius had finally exhausted its fury after more than 18 hours of continuous eruption that had reshaped the landscape of southern Italy and eliminated several thriving cities from the map of the Roman world. The eruption column collapsed for the final time, no longer supported by the volcanic forces that had sustained it through the long night of destruction, and an unnatural silence settled over the Bay of Naples like a burial shroud, covering the dead. Where Pompeii had stood with its forum and theaters, its shops and homes, its temples and public baths, there was now only a gently rolling landscape of gray volcanic deposits that gave no hint of the vibrant urban life that lay buried beneath. The city, its people, their hopes and dreams and daily routines, their artistic achievements and commercial enterprises, their loves and fears and eternal human struggles, all lay entombed beneath 20 feet of ashen pumice and hardened pyroclastic flow material. The mountain that had nurtured this civilization for centuries, providing the fertile soil and abundant water that made prosperity possible, had reclaimed its gifts in less than 24 hours, demonstrating with terrible clarity the awesome power of geological forces that dwarf human ambition and make mockery of human pretensions to permanence. Across the Bay of Naples, in the relative safety of Misenum, where the Roman fleet had its base and where the winds had carried the ash cloud away from rather than toward the populated areas, 18-year-old Pliny the Younger sat by candlelight in the pre-dawn hours, his hands still shaking from the terror and awe of what he had witnessed, attempting to write the first draft of what would become one of history's most important eyewitness accounts of natural disaster. His stylus moved across the wax tablet with unusual urgency as he tried to capture in words the indescribable spectacle of the eruption column that had risen from Vesuvius like a tree whose trunk could shade entire provinces, and whose branches could darken the sky from horizon to horizon. He wrote of the panic among the refugees who had fled across the bay in boats of every description, carrying tales of destruction that seemed too terrible to believe. He described the unnatural darkness that had fallen over the entire region, the rain of ash that had reached even Misenum, and the sounds of lamentation that rose from the crowded harbor, where survivors searched desperately for missing family members. He wrote for his uncle, Pliny the Elder, the famous naturalist who had died attempting to rescue friends from the disaster, sailing his ship directly into the zone of destruction in a final act of courage and scientific curiosity. But he also wrote for posterity, understanding with the intuition of a young man trained in rhetoric and philosophy that he was recording events that would echo through history, that would be studied and remembered long after the political scandals and military campaigns that normally filled historical accounts were forgotten. Beneath its protective blanket of volcanic material, Pompeii began its long wait for rediscovery, perfectly preserved by the same forces that had destroyed it, maintained in a state of suspended animation that would allow future generations to walk through Roman streets exactly as they had existed on the morning of August 24th, 79 AD. The ash and pumice that had killed the city also created ideal conditions for preservation, sealing buildings and artifacts away from air and moisture, protecting organic materials that would normally decay within years or decades, maintaining colors and textures and details that would astonish archaeologists 17 centuries in the future. Houses stood intact with meals still on the tables, bread still in the ovens, wine still in the amphorae that lined storage rooms. Graffiti remained fresh on walls, preserving the casual thoughts and declarations of love from people whose names were otherwise lost to history. Gardens maintained the exact shapes of plants and trees, their root systems creating hollow spaces in the volcanic ash that would allow modern scientists to recreate the landscaping that had made Pompeii famous for its beauty. And scattered throughout the city, in homes and streets and public buildings, the shapes of human beings were preserved in the volcanic material, not their physical bodies, which had long since decayed, but perfect molds that showed their final positions, their last gestures, their humanity frozen in time, like sculptures created by forces beyond any human artist's imagination. Over the centuries that followed the eruption, memory of Pompeii gradually faded from historical consciousness, surviving only in the accounts of ancient writers like Pliny and in local legends that most people dismissed as fantastic tales from a superstitious past. The fertile volcanic soil that had buried the city became some of the most productive farmland in Italy, and generations of farmers planted vineyards and olive groves above Roman houses, raised families in rural homes built above buried palaces, and lived their entire lives unaware that they were walking daily over one of the most perfectly preserved cities in human history. Children played in fields where Roman children had once played, separated by 17 centuries and 20 feet of volcanic rock that might as well have been an ocean of time. The mountain that had destroyed Pompeii gradually recovered its peaceful appearance, its slopes once again green with vegetation that grew in soil enriched by the same volcanic activity that had spelled doom for the ancient city. Mount Vesuvius resumed its role as a benevolent provider, its crater quiet and seemingly harmless, its periodic minor eruptions barely noticed by populations that had learned to live with the geological instability that characterized this beautiful but dangerous region of southern Italy. In 1748, more than 16 centuries after Vesuvius had buried Pompeii, Spanish military engineer Roque Joaquin de Alcubierre began systematic excavations at a site near Naples, where local farmers had occasionally found ancient artifacts while plowing their fields or digging foundations for new buildings. What began as a search for valuable antiquities to decorate the palace of the Bourbon King of Naples quickly became something far more significant, as workers carefully removed centuries of accumulated soil and volcanic debris to reveal not just isolated artifacts, but the outlines of entire buildings. Streets began to appear, then houses with their rooms intact, then entire city blocks with their original layouts preserved in perfect detail. The workers were not just uncovering ruins, but a complete Roman city, preserved as if its inhabitants had stepped out for a brief errand and would return at any moment to resume their daily lives. The discovery would revolutionize the emerging science of archaeology and give the modern world an unprecedented window into ancient life, allowing scholars and ordinary visitors alike to experience the reality of Roman civilization in ways that no amount of reading ancient texts could provide. In 1863, Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli developed a technique that would bring the people of Pompeii back to life in the most moving and immediate way possible, creating a direct emotional connection between modern visitors and ancient victims that transcended all barriers of time and culture. When excavators found hollow spaces in the hardened volcanic ash where human bodies had once lain, Fiorelli realized that these cavities represented perfect molds of people in their final moments, preserved by the ash that had killed them. By carefully injecting liquid plaster into these spaces, he could create exact replicas of the victims, capturing not just their positions, but their clothing, their expressions, and their final gestures with heartbreaking accuracy. The results were extraordinary and deeply moving. Perfect casts that showed a mother sheltering her child with her own body, a gladiator falling with his hand reaching toward the sword that might have saved him, a family huddled together in their final moments, a dog chained in a courtyard, and forever frozen in its desperate struggle for freedom. These casts transformed Pompeii from an archaeological site of purely academic interest into a profoundly human place, where visitors could connect emotionally with people who had lived and died 2,000 years ago, making the ancient past immediate and real in ways that scholarly research alone could never achieve. Today, Pompeii stands as one of the world's most important and moving archaeological sites, where millions of visitors each year walk through streets that look exactly as they did on the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, experiencing Roman urban life with an immediacy and authenticity that no other ancient site can provide. The main streets are lined with shops whose goods are still visible on their shelves, taverns whose menus are still painted on their walls, and homes whose gardens still show the exact patterns their owners planted 2 millennia ago. Visitors can see the same views that Marcus the baker enjoyed from his shop, walk through the same rooms where Lucius conducted his wine business, and touch the same stones that witness the daily dramas of love and loss, hope and fear, ambition and disappointment that characterized human life in the ancient world. The bakeries still show the charred remains of bread that was baking when the eruption began, preserved by the volcanic ash that killed its bakers. The walls of buildings throughout the city are covered with graffiti that reveals the thoughts, jokes, political opinions, and declarations of love from people whose names are otherwise lost to history, providing an unfiltered glimpse into the minds and hearts of ordinary Romans who never expected their casual scribblings to be read by visitors from across the globe 20 centuries later. Mount Vesuvius remains an active volcano today, carefully monitored by sophisticated seismological equipment and satellite surveillance that would have seemed like divine magic to the people of ancient Pompeii, yet which cannot eliminate the fundamental reality that this beautiful and dangerous mountain will erupt again someday. The city of Naples, with its metropolitan population of over 3 million inhabitants, sits in the shadow of this sleeping giant, much as Pompeii once did, protected by early warning systems and evacuation plans that should prevent the kind of catastrophic loss of life that occurred in 79 AD, but still vulnerable to the awesome forces that lie dormant beneath the Earth's surface. Modern volcanologists understand the geological processes that create eruptions like the one that destroyed Pompeii. And they can predict with reasonable accuracy when dangerous activity is likely to begin, but they cannot prevent it or fully control its effects once it starts. The lessons of Pompeii serve as a constant reminder that we live on a dynamic planet where geological forces can overwhelm human civilization in moments, that our sense of security and permanence is ultimately an illusion, but also that human courage, love, and dignity can transcend even the greatest natural disasters, creating meaning and beauty that outlast the forces that try to destroy them. When visitors walk through Pompeii today, they often find themselves speaking in whispers, moved by the profound sense of connection to people who lived so long ago yet who seem startlingly immediate and real in this perfectly preserved environment. The ancient city reminds us that the essential human experiences, love of family, pride in work, hope for the future, courage in crisis, the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with friends, remain constant across cultures and centuries, transcending all differences of language, religion, and historical circumstance. The people of Pompeii were not ancient Romans first. They were human beings first, who happened to live in a particular time and place that we call ancient, but which was modern and contemporary to them. Their stories speak to us across the centuries because they are, in the deepest sense, our stories too, reminders that we share with them the same fundamental hopes and fears, the same capacity for love and courage, the same vulnerability to forces beyond our control, and the same need to find meaning and dignity in the brief span of time that each of us is given on this beautiful and dangerous planet. Their preserved city stands as testimony to the universal human experience, a bridge across time that connects us to our common humanity and reminds us that the bonds between people are stronger than any force that tries to break them. Our fire has burned very low now, dear friends, the flames reduced to a gentle dance among the glowing coals that will continue to warm us through the remaining hours of this peaceful night that wraps around us like a protective blanket. The story of Pompeii has reached its end, but the lessons it teaches us continue to glow like these embers, providing warmth and light that will outlast the wood that feeds them. Above us, the same stars that shone down on Pompeii in its final hours shine tonight, eternal witnesses to both the sorrows and the beauty of human existence, silent guardians who have watched over countless generations of people who lived and loved and struggled and dreamed beneath their patient light. The night air is cool and clean here in our forest sanctuary, filled with the scent of pine and the promise of dawn still hours away, reminding us of the simple gifts that the people of Pompeii lost in a single day. The ability to breathe freely, to feel safe in our homes, to plan for tomorrow with confidence, to wake each morning expecting another ordinary day filled with familiar pleasures and routine challenges. As we sit here in comfort and safety, warmed by our fire, and protected by the peaceful forest that surrounds our clearing like a natural cathedral, we might take a moment to reflect on the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit that Pompeii represents in ways both tragic and inspiring. Though the city died in a single day, consumed by forces beyond any human power to resist or control, its story has lived for 2 millennia, teaching each generation about courage in the face of the impossible, about the precious nature of ordinary life, and about the importance of treasuring each moment we have with those we love. The people of Pompeii achieved a kind of immortality through their final moments of dignity and love. Their story preserved not just in volcanic ash, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who learns from their example. They remind us that meaning comes not from the length of our lives, but from the depth of our connections to each other, not from our ability to control the forces around us, but from our capacity to face whatever comes with grace and courage, not from our achievements or possessions, but from our willingness to love fully and deeply while we have the chance. In the centuries since Pompeii was buried beneath the wrath of Mount Vesuvius, the volcanic soil that destroyed the ancient city has created some of the most fertile and productive farmland in all of Europe, supporting vineyards that produce wines as fine as any that Lucius Caesius Secundus shipped to Rome at the height of the empire. Children play today in gardens where flowers bloom with extraordinary beauty, nourished by the same minerals that once spelled death for an entire civilization, their laughter echoing across landscapes that have witnessed both tremendous destruction and remarkable renewal. This is the eternal cycle of our planet and our lives. Destruction giving way to creation, death nurturing new life, tragedy becoming the foundation for future hope and beauty. The mountain that killed Pompeii also gave it a unique form of immortality, preserving its story for us to learn from and remember, ensuring that the voices of its people would continue to speak across the centuries, teaching us about courage and love and the precious fragility of everything we hold dear. In this way, even the most terrible disasters can become sources of wisdom and inspiration, reminding us that human dignity can transcend any force that tries to destroy it. Tonight, as we prepare to let sleep carry us gently into dreams, we might feel a special gratitude for the simple things that the people of Pompeii lost in a single day, but which we are blessed to enjoy. The ability to breathe clean air without thinking about it, to feel completely safe in our homes and communities, to wake up each morning expecting another ordinary day filled with familiar routines and predictable challenges. These simple gifts, so easy to take for granted in our comfortable modern lives, were precious beyond measure to those who lost them on Mount Vesuvius's day of wrath. Perhaps the greatest lesson that Pompeii teaches us is to notice and appreciate the miracle of an ordinary day, to love deeply and openly while we have the chance, to find meaning and joy in the simple rhythms of daily life that connect us to each other and to the generations who came before us. The people of Pompeii lived fully in their time, worked with pride and dedication, loved their families and friends with passion and devotion, and faced their final moments with a dignity that still inspires us 20 centuries later. We can ask no more of life than the opportunity to follow their example, to live with the same fullness and courage they showed, to appreciate each day as the gift it truly is. The story of Pompeii reminds us, with both gentleness and clarity, that all human things are temporary and fragile. Our cities and civilizations, our achievements and monuments, our individual lives and the lives of those we love are all brief moments in the vast span of geological and cosmic time. But rather than making life meaningless or filling us with despair, this understanding of impermanence can make every moment infinitely precious, every connection deeply valuable, every experience rich with significance that comes from knowing how rare and fleeting such gifts truly are. Every sunrise we witness, every conversation we share with a friend, every moment of laughter or wonder or simple contentment becomes valuable beyond measure when we understand how temporary these experiences are, how easily they can be lost, how much we should treasure them while they are ours. The people of Pompeii lived fully in their time, embraced their world with passion and commitment, worked and loved and dreamed with the intensity that comes from being completely present in the moment. They faced their end with courage and dignity, holding on to what mattered most, their love for each other, their care for their families, their determination to maintain their humanity even in the face of cosmic forces beyond human understanding or control. Look up once more at the brilliant stars above our peaceful clearing, the same celestial lights that shone down on Pompeii during its final hours and have continued to shine through all the centuries since, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of countless individuals, the endless human story of struggle and triumph, love and loss, hope and courage that continues beneath their eternal watch. Somewhere in that glorious tapestry of light are the same constellations that Roman astronomers mapped with careful precision, the same patterns that guided merchant ships across the Mediterranean, the same stellar fires that gave comfort and inspiration to people facing their darkest nights. We are connected to those ancient souls not just by the accident of history or the curiosity of archaeology, but by our shared humanity under this same eternal sky, by the same capacity for wonder and love that led them to create beauty in their brief time and leads us to remember and honor their stories. Their courage lives on in us. Their love for life inspires our own appreciation for the gifts we have been given, and their dignity in facing the impossible reminds us that we too can find meaning and grace no matter what challenges await us in our own uncertain future. The night grows deeper around us now, and our campfire settles into the soft glow of embers that will keep us warm until dawn brings its promise of new light and new possibilities. The forest around us breathes with the quiet rhythms of night, the gentle whisper of wind through pine needles that sound like distant voices sharing ancient secrets, the peaceful call of an owl somewhere in the darkness beyond our circle of light, the soft rustle of small creatures moving safely through their woodland home, secure in the natural rhythms that have governed this place for countless generations. This is the peace that follows every storm, the quiet that comes after every tragedy, the rest that waits at the end of every long day filled with struggle and uncertainty. Let the story of Pompeii settle gently into your heart like these glowing embers, warming you with the knowledge that human love and courage can transcend even the greatest disasters, that dignity and beauty can emerge from the most terrible circumstances, that the connections between people are stronger than any force that tries to break them. Here in our safe sanctuary, surrounded by the protective darkness of the forest, and watched over by stars that have seen everything and remember everything, you can rest peacefully, knowing that morning will come, that hope survives every tragedy, that love continues even when everything else seems lost. Though dawn is still many hours away, we can rest in the absolute certainty that it will come, that this peaceful night will give way to morning light filtering through the pine branches above us, that the world will continue its ancient dance of darkness and light, ending and beginning, loss and renewal, that has sustained life on this planet for millions of years, and will continue long after our own brief stories have ended. The people of Pompeii did not have the gift of seeing another sunrise, but we do, and that gift comes with both privilege and responsibility. The privilege of experiencing another day filled with possibilities they could only dream of, and the responsibility to live that day with the fullness and appreciation their example teaches us. When morning comes to our forest clearing, we will wake to the sound of birds singing in the trees, to golden light dancing on the leaves, to the fresh scent of morning air that carries the promise of new experiences and unexpected joys. We will have the gift of another ordinary day, another chance to love and work and hope, another opportunity to create meaning and beauty in our brief time beneath the stars, another day to honor the memory of those who came before us by living with the same courage and dignity they showed in their final moments. From our safe distance of 2,000 years and many miles, Mount Vesuvius appears in our imagination not as a destroyer of cities, but as a teacher of profound lessons about the nature of existence itself, about the relationship between human ambition and natural forces, about the importance of living fully in whatever time we are given. The mountain that brought such sudden tragedy to Pompeii also gave the world an incomparable gift, a perfectly preserved window into ancient life that allows us to walk through Roman streets, to understand how people lived and loved and worked 2 millennia ago, to connect across vast spans of time with the universal human experiences that unite us all. Even the most destructive forces in nature can become sources of wisdom and beauty when viewed with the perspective that only time and distance can provide. The mountain stands now as it stood then, eternal and patient, a reminder of the vast geological forces that shape our world and the precious brevity of our individual lives within the great sweep of cosmic time. It teaches us humility in the face of powers beyond our control, but also courage in the knowledge that human dignity and love can create meaning that transcends any temporary disaster. As our long story draws toward its peaceful conclusion, and the night deepens around our protective fire, we might feel a deep sense of gratitude for the privilege of witnessing, across the vast span of centuries, the final day of an ancient city and the eternal humanity of its people. We have been invisible guests at their tables, silent witnesses to their courage, and humble students of their wisdom about what makes life meaningful and precious. Though they could not have imagined it as they faced their final hours, the people of Pompeii have been our teachers tonight, sharing with us across 20 centuries their knowledge about love and loss, courage and dignity, the importance of family and community, and the need to appreciate each ordinary day as the miracle it truly is. Their voices have spoken to us through the darkness, carried on the same night wind that stirs our fire and rustles the pine branches above us, reminding us that we are part of an unbroken chain of human experience that connects every generation to those who came before and those who will come after. Stories like the one we have shared tonight have been told around fires like ours for as long as human beings have gathered in the darkness, to share their wisdom and wonder, to pass on the lessons learned by those who came before, to find meaning in the brief, beautiful, sometimes tragic mystery of human existence. The campfire is humanity's first and most enduring institution, our first theater, where stories came alive in the dancing light, our first classroom, where the young learned from the old, our first sacred space, where the living honored the dead by remembering their courage and keeping their wisdom alive. Tonight, we have been part of that ancient and continuing tradition, carriers of the flame that connects us to every human who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered about their place in the vast cosmos. Every person who has ever loved deeply enough to risk great loss, every individual who has faced the impossible with dignity and grace. The fire that warmed the people of Pompeii still warms us, not the physical flames that heated their homes and cooked their food, but the spiritual fire of memory and story, of our endless human need to find meaning in darkness, to create light in the face of uncertainty, to connect with each other across all barriers of time and space and circumstance. Let yourself rest now, dear listener, here beside our dying fire, under the eternal stars that have watched over countless generations of dreamers and storytellers, safe in the knowledge that you are protected by the peaceful forest around us and by the love that connects all people across time and space. Let the story of Pompeii settle gently into your dreams, not as a tale of tragedy and loss, but as a reminder of the preciousness of every breath you take, every heartbeat that sustains you, every moment of peace and safety, like this one, that wraps around you like a warm blanket. Sleep peacefully, knowing that you are completely safe here in our forest sanctuary. That morning will come with its promise of new light and new possibilities, that tomorrow holds new stories to discover and new reasons to be grateful for the gift of another day. The glowing embers will keep their patient watch over your rest, and the stars will guard your dreams until dawn calls you gently back to the waking world, refreshed and renewed by the wisdom of the ancients who still speak to us across the centuries through the power of preserved memory and shared human experience. Even today, more than 2 centuries after the first systematic excavations began, archaeologists continue to uncover new areas of Pompeii, revealing fresh insights into Roman life and adding new chapters to the story we have shared tonight. Each season brings new discoveries: a previously unknown house with its frescoes still bright after 2 millennia, a shop with its goods still arranged on shelves, a garden where the exact species of ancient plants can be identified from the cavities, their roots left in the volcanic ash. Modern technology allows researchers to read scrolls that were carbonized by the heat of the eruption, to analyze the contents of cooking pots, to understand what Romans ate for their final meals, to determine the exact sequence of events during those terrible hours when the mountain destroyed the city. These ongoing discoveries ensure that Pompeii remains a living laboratory where the past continues to reveal its secrets, where new generations of scholars can contribute to our understanding of ancient life, where the conversation between past and present continues to evolve and deepen with each artifact that emerges from the protective volcanic soil. The story of Pompeii has touched hearts and minds around the world, inspiring countless works of art, literature, and music that have kept the memory of the ancient city alive in popular culture as well as academic scholarship. From Edward Bulwer Lytton's famous novel, The Last Days of Pompeii, to modern films and documentaries, from classical paintings depicting the eruption to contemporary photographs that capture the haunting beauty of the preserved ruins, artists and writers have found in Pompeii a perfect symbol of both human vulnerability and human resilience. Visitors from every continent make pilgrimages to walk the ancient streets, and their reactions are remarkably similar, regardless of their cultural background. A sense of awe at the preservation, sadness for the victims, and profound appreciation for the window into ancient life that the buried city provides. Pompeii has become a universal human heritage site, a place where people from all backgrounds can connect with the experiences that unite us across cultures and centuries. The eruption that destroyed Pompeii has provided modern science with invaluable insights into volcanic processes and has contributed significantly to our ability to predict and prepare for similar disasters in the contemporary world. The detailed sequence of events preserved in the archaeological record, combined with Pliny the Younger's eyewitness account, gives volcanologists a complete picture of how Plinian eruptions develop and progress, allowing them to recognize warning signs and develop evacuation procedures that could save millions of lives. The study of Pompeii has also contributed to our understanding of how volcanic ash affects human health, how pyroclastic flows behave as they move across landscapes, and how volcanic disasters impact not just the immediate area, but entire regions and economies. This scientific knowledge, gained from careful study of an ancient tragedy, serves as one of Pompeii's most practical gifts to the modern world. The ability to protect contemporary populations from the same forces that destroyed the Roman city, ensuring that the lessons written in volcanic ash continue to save lives 2,000 years after they were first inscribed. Museums around the world house artifacts from Pompeii, ensuring that even those who cannot visit the archaeological site itself can experience the immediacy and emotional power of objects touched by people on their final day. These carefully preserved items, bronze cooking pots still containing the remains of ancient meals, jewelry that adorned women who never expected to become historical figures, tools used by craftsmen who took pride in their work, toys that delighted children who played with them on the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, serve as tangible connections to lives that ended 2 millennia ago, but feel startlingly immediate and real. Educational programs in schools worldwide use Pompeii as a way to make ancient history come alive for young students, helping them understand that people in the past were not fundamentally different from people today, that history is not just a collection of dates and facts, but a record of human experiences that continue to resonate across time. Through these efforts, the memory of Pompeii's people is kept alive. Their stories continue to be told, and their lessons about courage, love, and human dignity remain available to inspire new generations. The relationship between Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius offers important lessons about how human communities can coexist with natural hazards, while acknowledging both the benefits and risks that such relationships entail. The fertile volcanic soil that made the region prosperous was directly connected to the volcanic activity that ultimately destroyed the city, reminding us that the same natural forces that support human civilization can also threaten it. Modern communities living near active volcanoes face similar challenges, balancing the economic advantages of fertile soil and geothermal energy against the risks of future eruptions. The story of Pompeii encourages us to respect natural forces while taking appropriate precautions, to enjoy the gifts that dynamic geological processes provide, while maintaining realistic assessments of the risks they pose. This balance between appreciation and caution, between making the most of natural resources and preparing for natural disasters, represents a kind of wisdom that the people of Pompeii might have benefited from, and that contemporary societies continue to develop as they face their own environmental challenges. Each person who encounters the story of Pompeii finds in it reflections of their own life experiences, their own relationships, their own hopes and fears about the future. Parents see Julia protecting her children and understand the fierce love that drives such sacrifice. Workers recognize Marcus the baker's dedication to his craft and his difficulty in abandoning everything he had built. Young people identify with Pliny, the younger's mixture of curiosity and terror, as he witnessed events beyond his comprehension. The elderly understand the choices faced by those who could not or would not flee, who preferred to face their end in familiar surroundings rather than venture into an uncertain future. These personal connections are what give Pompeii its continuing power to move and inspire people across cultures and centuries. The ancient story becomes a mirror in which we see our own lives more clearly, our own relationships more deeply, our own mortality more honestly, helping us appreciate what we have while we have it, and encouraging us to live with greater awareness of what truly matters. Despite more than 2 centuries of excavation and study, Pompeii continues to hold mysteries that challenge researchers and capture imaginations. New areas of the city remain buried, waiting to reveal their secrets to future generations of archaeologists. Questions about daily life, social relationships, economic systems, and cultural practices continue to generate new research and new insights into how Romans lived and worked and loved. The preserved city serves as an inexhaustible source of information about the ancient world, a place where each new discovery adds depth and nuance to our understanding of human civilization. This ongoing process of discovery means that Pompeii remains a living conversation between past and present, a dialogue that enriches both our knowledge of history and our understanding of ourselves. The wonder that drove Pliny the Younger to record his observations continues to motivate modern researchers and visitors, ensuring that the ancient city's capacity to teach and inspire remains as fresh and powerful today as it was when the first excavators uncovered the buried streets and brought the preserved past back into the light. Our fire has burned down to its final glowing coals now, providing just enough warmth and light to remind us of the human capacity to create comfort and safety, even in the midst of darkness and uncertainty. The night around us has reached its deepest hour, when the forest sleeps most peacefully and the stars shine with their greatest brilliance, when the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes soft and permeable, allowing stories from the distant past to blend gently with hopes for the future. The embers pulse with a gentle rhythm like a slow heartbeat, like the steady breathing of the earth itself, reminding us that even when active flames die down, the essential fire continues, ready to kindle new light when morning comes. This is how memory works, how stories survive across generations, not as bright flames that demand constant attention, but as glowing coals that maintain their warmth through the longest nights, ready to burst into new life when someone tends them with care and attention, ready to provide comfort and wisdom to all who gather around them seeking warmth and understanding. As we prepare to let sleep carry us away from this ancient story and into our own private dreams, we might reflect on how the experiences we have witnessed tonight continue to unfold in our own time, in our own lives, in our own communities around the world. People still work with dedication and pride, still love their families with fierce devotion, still face uncertain futures with courage and hope, still make difficult choices between safety and loyalty, still find meaning in the simple rhythms of daily life that connect them to their neighbors and their traditions. The human story that played out in Pompeii continues to play out wherever people gather to build communities, create beauty, raise children, and support each other through the challenges that life presents. We are the inheritors of their courage, the beneficiaries of their wisdom, the continuation of their story in our own time and place. The fire that sustained them sustains us still, the fire of human connection, of love that transcends individual mortality, of meaning that emerges from the simple act of caring for each other and finding joy in the brief time we share beneath the eternal stars. We have traveled far tonight, dear companions of this fireside story, journeying back across 20 centuries to witness courage and love in the face of cosmic forces beyond human control, to learn from people who faced their final day with dignity and grace, to understand that the essential human experiences transcend all barriers of time and culture and circumstance. We have been privileged to walk through ancient streets, to witness the daily lives of Romans who never expected to become our teachers, to observe the final hours of a civilization that seemed destined to last forever, but discovered the fragility that underlies all human achievements. Their story has enriched our understanding of what it means to be human, what it means to love deeply and work proudly and face uncertainty with courage. As we prepare to close this chapter of our night together, we can feel grateful for the safety that surrounds us, for the peace that cradles us, for the tomorrow that awaits us, with its promise of new experiences and new opportunities to live with the wisdom that Pompeii's people have shared across the vast expanse of time. One last ember glows in the heart of our fire, pulsing gently like a tiny star that has fallen to earth to keep us company through the deepest hours of night. This final light represents all the lights that have guided humanity through dark times. The oil lamps that illuminated Roman homes, the candles that sustained hope through medieval winters, the electric bulbs that pushed back the darkness of modern cities, and the inner light of human courage that shines brightest when external circumstances are most challenging. That same light glows within each of us, ready to kindle new fires of compassion and understanding, ready to illuminate paths forward even when the way seems uncertain, ready to provide warmth and comfort to others who gather around the eternal campfires where human stories are shared and human wisdom is passed from generation to generation. As this ember fades into the quiet darkness, it carries with it our gratitude for the people of Pompeii, our appreciation for the lessons they have taught us, and our commitment to honor their memory by living with the same fullness and dignity they showed in their final hours. Now, let the darkness embrace you completely, gentle listener, as you rest here in the heart of this ancient forest where the trees have stood for generations, where the earth remembers all the stories that have been told beneath their protective branches, where the night air carries the whispers of countless souls who have found peace in natural sanctuaries like this one. The stars above continue their eternal watch, the same stars that shone on Pompeii, the same lights that have guided travelers and dreamers and storytellers for all of human history. They will watch over your dreams tonight, ensuring that your sleep is peaceful and restorative, that your rest is deep and healing, that you wake refreshed and renewed by the wisdom you have gained from witnessing the courage of ancient people who faced their final day with grace and dignity. Sleep now in the knowledge that their story continues in your heart, that their love transcends the tragedy that ended their lives, that their example of human dignity in the face of impossible circumstances will inspire your own journey through whatever challenges and opportunities await you in the bright morning that will surely come. Rest well, dream peacefully, and wake tomorrow, ready to live with the fullness and appreciation that Pompeii's people have taught us to value above all other treasures. Though our story has ended and our fire has died down to silent ashes, The night itself is beginning its gradual surrender to the approaching dawn that will bring new light to our forest clearing and new possibilities to our waking world. Somewhere beyond these protective trees, the sky is beginning its slow transformation from the deep black of night to the soft gray that precedes sunrise, preparing for the daily miracle of dawn that has marked the passage of time since the earth first began to turn beneath the light of its star. This approaching morning carries with it all the hope and renewal that each new day brings. The chance to see familiar things with fresh eyes, to appreciate simple gifts that we might have overlooked in our busy lives, to connect more deeply with the people we love, to live with greater awareness of the precious nature of ordinary moments. The people of Pompeii did not have the gift of seeing another sunrise, but we do. And that gift comes to us enriched by their example, deepened by their wisdom, made more precious by our understanding of how quickly such gifts can be lost. As we prepare to leave this peaceful clearing and return to our daily lives, we carry with us more than just the memory of an ancient story. We carry the living wisdom of people who faced their final day with courage and love, who showed us that dignity and grace can emerge from even the most tragic circumstances, who demonstrated that human connections are stronger than any force that tries to break them. Their story becomes part of our story now. Their courage becomes part of our courage. Their love for life becomes part of our appreciation for each day we are given. In the hours and days and years ahead, when we face our own challenges and uncertainties, we can remember Marcus the baker's dedication to his craft, Julia's protective love for her children, Gaius the gladiator's choice to help others even in his final moments, and all the other examples of human nobility that emerged from Pompeii's darkest hour. Their voices will speak to us across the centuries whenever we need reminding of what truly matters, whenever we need inspiration to face our own difficulties with grace and dignity. Around campfires and hearths throughout the world, in every culture and every generation, people continue to gather as we have gathered tonight, sharing stories that connect them to their past and inspire their future, finding in ancient wisdom the guidance they need for contemporary challenges. The tradition we have participated in tonight is as old as humanity itself and as enduring as the stars that have witnessed every tale ever told around flickering flames. Somewhere tonight, a grandmother tells her grandchildren about ancestors who showed courage in difficult times. Somewhere a teacher shares with students the story of people who lived in distant places and faced impossible circumstances with dignity. Somewhere friends gather around a fire and remind each other of the lessons learned by those who came before, the wisdom that emerges from human experience, the hope that survives every tragedy and loss. We are all part of this continuing conversation between past and present, all participants in the eternal human story that unfolds wherever people gather to share their experiences and learn from each other's journeys through the brief, beautiful mystery of existence beneath the eternal stars. May the story of Pompeii's people stay with you as a blessing and an inspiration, reminding you to live fully in whatever time you are given, to love deeply and openly while you have the chance, to find meaning and joy in the simple daily experiences that connect you to your family, your community, and the long chain of human experience that stretches back to the very beginning of our species' journey on this beautiful and sometimes dangerous planet. May their courage strengthen your own courage when you face difficult choices. May their love for life deepen your own appreciation for each ordinary day. May their dignity in facing the impossible inspire your own grace when circumstances beyond your control challenge everything you hold dear. And may you always remember that you are part of a story larger than your individual life, connected across time and space to all who have lived and loved and struggled and dreamed beneath these same stars, inheritors of their wisdom and guardians of their memory, carriers of the eternal human flame that no disaster can extinguish, no tragedy can destroy, no force in all the universe can ultimately defeat. Goodbye, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and join us here next time at Histories by Starlight.